A man climbed a 400-foot cliff in the middle of a battle while Japanese soldiers were shooting at him. He was not a soldier. He did not carry a rifle. He did not fire a single shot. He was a medic, a Seventh-day Adventist, a conscientious objector, a man who believed that killing was a sin. And on one day in May of 1945, at a place called Hacksaw Ridge in Okinawa, this man saved the lives of 75 wounded soldiers. Not by fighting, not by killing, but by doing something so simple, so human, that it would change how the military thought about courage forever. This is the story of Desmond Doss. This is how one man's faith became a weapon more powerful than any gun. It was April 1945. The war in the Pacific was reaching its final stages. Japan was losing. Everyone knew it. But Japan would not surrender. The military leadership had ordered every soldier to fight to the death. Every civilian had been told to resist invasion. The United States was moving island by island toward the Japanese homeland. Okinawa was the final stepping stone. It was the largest battle of the Pacific War. Over 100,000 Japanese soldiers were defending the island. Over 50,000 American soldiers would be sent to take it. The casualty estimates were catastrophic. Military planners expected 30,000 American casualties. Some estimates went higher. The battle would be brutal. The battle would be merciless. And in the midst of that battle, a young medic named Desmond Doss would become a legend. Desmond Doss was born in 1919 in Lynchburg, Virginia. He grew up in a Seventh-day Adventist family. The church taught that killing was a sin, that violence was wrong, that even in war a man should not take another man's life. When the draft came, Desmond faced a choice. He could resist the draft and face imprisonment, or he could serve, but serve as a conscientious objector. He chose to serve. He joined the army, but he made one request. He asked to be a medic, a combat medic. He wanted to save lives, not take them. He wanted to help the wounded, not create more wounded. The army accepted his request, but the other soldiers did not accept him. In basic training, Desmond was mocked. The other soldiers called him a coward. They called him weak. They called him a traitor to America. Other soldiers would beat him. They would threaten him. They would tell him he would get them all killed. A man who refused to carry a weapon, they said, was a liability. He was a danger. He was not a real soldier. But Desmond did not fight back. He did not respond with anger. He simply continued to do his duty. He studied to be a medic. He learned to treat wounds. He learned to save lives. And he waited for his chance to prove himself. That chance came on April 27, 1945, on the island of Okinawa. Desmond's unit, the 307th Infantry Regiment, was fighting on a ridge. The ridge was called Hacksaw Ridge because of its sharp, jagged appearance. It rose about 400 feet above the ground below. The top of the ridge was covered with Japanese defensive positions, machine gun nests, mortar positions, anti-tank guns, artillery. The Americans tried to take the ridge. They attacked up the steep slopes. The Japanese fired down upon them. The fighting was close quarters. It was brutal. After several hours, the Americans managed to reach the top of the ridge. They held a small section, but it was not enough. The Japanese launched a counterattack. Waves of Japanese soldiers came at the American position. The fighting became hand-to-hand. Grenades were thrown. Bayonets were used. Men were killed and wounded. The Americans, outnumbered and running low on ammunition, were forced to retreat. They pulled back down the ridge. But they left behind something they could not afford to leave behind. They left behind wounded soldiers, soldiers who could not walk, soldiers who were bleeding, soldiers who would die if they were not treated, soldiers who would be captured or executed by the Japanese if they stayed behind. The American command made the decision. The ridge would be retaken, and the wounded soldiers had to be rescued. That night, under cover of darkness, Desmond Doss made a decision. He would go back up the ridge. He would find the wounded soldiers. He would rescue them. But there was a problem. The ridge was 400 feet high. It was nearly vertical in places. There was no easy way down. If a soldier tried to climb down, they would fall. If a soldier tried to walk down, they would be exposed to Japanese fire. Desmond realized he needed a system. He needed a way to lower wounded soldiers down safely. He looked around for materials. He found a rope, a grappling hook, straps. He fashioned a system, a harness, a pulley system, something that would allow him to lower a wounded soldier down the cliff face safely. And then Desmond Doss did something that no one thought was possible. He climbed back up the cliff, alone, in the dark, into enemy territory. The Japanese had not fully retaken the ridge. They were still up there. They were still armed. They were still dangerous. But Desmond climbed. His heart was pounding. His hands were shaking, but he climbed. When he reached the top, he found wounded soldiers, American soldiers who could not move, who were bleeding, who were dying. Desmond did not hesitate. He took the first wounded soldier. He put the harness on him. He attached the rope, and he lowered him down. 400 feet, slowly, carefully, down the cliff face. The wounded soldier reached the ground. He was safe. He was alive. Desmond went back up, and he did it again, and again, and again. All night long, over and over, he would climb 400 feet up a nearly vertical cliff in the darkness with Japanese soldiers nearby. He would find a wounded soldier. He would harness him. He would lower him down 400 feet, and then he would climb back up and do it again. Hour after hour, night after night. The Japanese saw him. They shot at him. Bullets passed near him. Mortar shells exploded around him. But Desmond did not stop. He kept climbing. He kept rescuing. He kept lowering wounded soldiers to safety. By the end of the first night, Desmond had lowered over 20 wounded soldiers. Over 20 men who would have died or been captured were now safe. But he did not stop there. The fighting continued. More soldiers were wounded. The next day came. The Americans tried again to take the ridge. They fought, they bled. More soldiers fell. And when night came again, Desmond climbed again. He went back up the cliff, alone, without a weapon, without protection, just a rope and a harness and a prayer. And he rescued more soldiers, night after night, day after day, for hours on end. He climbed that cliff over and over until his hands were raw, until his body was exhausted, until he had saved so many lives that the exact number became hard to count. The official record says Desmond Doss lowered 75 wounded soldiers down Hacksaw Ridge, 75 men who would have been left behind, 75 men who would have died, 75 men who would have been captured and executed, 75 lives saved by a man who refused to carry a gun. The other soldiers watched. They saw what Desmond was doing. They saw him climb that cliff in the darkness. They saw him lower wounded soldiers one by one. They saw him refuse to stop even when Japanese fire was coming down. And they began to understand something. They began to understand that courage is not about how many enemies you kill. Courage is about sacrifice. Courage is about doing what is right, even when it is the hardest thing in the world to do. But the story does not end there. The battle for Hacksaw Ridge continued for days. The Americans and Japanese fought back and forth over the ridge. Desmond continued to rescue soldiers. He continued to put himself in danger. On one day, a grenade exploded near him. He was wounded. Shrapnel tore into his leg. He was bleeding heavily. He was in pain. But he did not go back for medical treatment. He bandaged himself and kept working. He treated other wounded soldiers before he treated himself. He kept rescuing. He kept climbing. He kept putting his life on the line for others. Later in the battle, Desmond was hit again, this time by a sniper. A Japanese sniper shot him. The bullet went through his arm. He was wounded. He was bleeding. He was in shock. But Desmond did not panic. He did not run. He splinted his own arm using a rifle and gauze. He continued to work. He continued to treat wounded soldiers. He did this for several hours until he could finally be evacuated. Even as he was being carried away, he was helping other soldiers. He was giving medical advice. He was doing what medics do. He was saving lives. For his actions at Hacksaw Ridge, Desmond Doss received the Medal of Honor. He was the first conscientious objector to ever receive it, the first man who refused to kill to be honored as one of the bravest soldiers in American history. General Douglas MacArthur himself presented the medal. The general understood what Desmond had done. He understood that Desmond had done something extraordinary, something that changed how people thought about what a soldier could be. That a soldier did not have to kill to be brave, that a soldier could save lives. That a soldier could be faithful to his beliefs and still be the bravest man on the battlefield. After the war, Desmond Doss struggled. He was wounded, he had nightmares, he had trauma. The things he had seen, the things he had endured, stayed with him for the rest of his life. But he survived, he married, he had a family, he lived a quiet life. He did not talk much about what he had done. He was humble about his accomplishments. When people asked him about Hacksaw Ridge, he would say that he was just doing his duty. He was just helping people who were wounded. He did not think of himself as a hero. He thought of himself as a medic, someone who had a job to do, someone who had done that job the best way he could. But history remembers him differently. History remembers Desmond Doss as a man who proved that the greatest courage is not about violence. It is about compassion. It is about sacrifice. It is about putting your own safety aside to help others. It is about standing by your beliefs, even when everyone around you is telling you that you are wrong. Desmond Doss stood by his belief that killing was wrong. He served in combat. He was in the middle of a brutal war, and he refused to compromise his beliefs. Instead, he found a way to serve that honored those beliefs. He became a medic. He saved lives. He became a hero. The story of Desmond Doss reminds us of something important. It reminds us that heroes come in different forms. Not all heroes carry guns. Not all heroes kill the enemy. Some heroes climb 400-foot cliffs in the darkness to rescue wounded soldiers. Some heroes refuse to compromise their values even when it costs them. Some heroes prove that the greatest strength is not physical, it is spiritual, it is moral. It is the courage to do what is right, even when doing what is right is the hardest thing in the world. When Desmond Doss died in 2006, the world lost a reminder of what real courage looks like. But his story lives on. His name is remembered. His actions are studied. Young people learn about him in schools. Soldiers study his example. He has become a symbol of something that modern warfare sometimes forgets. That soldiers are human beings, that they can have beliefs, that they can refuse to kill and still be brave, that compassion and sacrifice are forms of courage, just as valid as any other form of bravery. Desmond Doss proved that on a ridge in Okinawa. He proved it by climbing a cliff 400 feet high over and over and over again. He proved it by lowering wounded soldiers to safety instead of taking up arms. He proved it by being faithful to his beliefs in the middle of a war that demanded compromise. So here is the question that remains. In your own life, when you are pressured to do something that goes against your beliefs, what will you do? Will you compromise? Or will you find another way? Will you find a way to serve that honors your values? Desmond Doss found a way. He served his country. He protected his brothers in arms, he saved lives, and he never fired a single shot. That is his legacy. That is why we remember him. That is why his story matters. Desmond Doss, the medic who refused to kill, became one of the bravest soldiers in American history. And his story teaches us that true courage is not about what you do to your enemies. It is about what you do for your friends. Desmond Doss didn't fire a single bullet, and yet he saved more lives than most of those who wielded a rifle. His rope, simple, improvised, even forbidden, became a symbol of faith, courage, and determination. If you believe that heroes are not only those who fight, but also those who save, leave a like and write in the comments, "A hero without weapons." This helps YouTube show this story to more people. And if you want to learn more about incredible tactics and innovations from World War II, subscribe now. Because in the next episode, you'll discover how a rejected welder created the weapon that saved 50 million hours of war.